Hello everybody and welcome back to the League on Wheels podcast. Season 2, episode 1, Tom. Are you excited?
Very excited. It feels a bit weird, to be honest, being at this side of the sofa and no longer being on the same team as you.
Oh, you are on a different team now. You've gone Super League and forgot your roots and left us at Batley Bulldogs.
I'll never forget my roots, though. I'll always be there, so yeah. Still feels a bit strange, though.
Still feels a bit strange. Well, we have to stick with it, mate, see what happens. So this season we're going to be back with even more episodes than last season. We've got some events to look forward to this year.
Exciting things this time around, yes. So,
and a World Cup.
And a World Cup.
A World Cup to look forward to in the middle.
But the most important thing is let's get this Challenge Cup out of the way first, starting this weekend.
It is the Challenge Cup weekend coming up now, and it's going to be exciting for everybody involved, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's get cracked on with episode 1 then. For this first episode, we have Godfrey in the studio, the social inclusion manager from the RFL. Welcome along, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
You're just having a look at my notes there, seeing what we're going to be talking about. I just have to have something in front of me so I can make sure I don't forget.
The interesting print on the bottom of your Adidas shoes there, but like a crop circle, it caught my eye. But no,
Just make sure you don't show him the other page with all the important questions.
All the customer questions.
Customer questions. Yeah. Complaints. Yeah. Customer complaints.
Anyway, welcome along, Chris. Thanks for coming.
No problem.
So, social inclusion manager. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and how we start off?
Without wanting to be too particular, the national inclusion manager's my role. But what's a national and social between friends? But my role kind of sits across every kind of inclusive aspect of rugby league, but on field. So we have our Tackle It plan, which looks to tackle inequalities against all the protected characteristics. My role specifically more focuses on the on-field disability sport. It's one that I've been doing since 2020. I came into role on February the 12th, I think. And then by mid-March, we was in a national lockdown and everything kind of hit the fan from there, really. But it was an interesting year and a really challenging year. And since then, we've kind of built and recovered and grown significantly. So, yeah, my role sits mainly across our learning disability variants, our physical disability offers, and the wheelchair offer as it currently stands. So, it's one that's quite widespread and broad, but one that's really enjoyable.
Any enjoyable aspects that you can think of, like what you really enjoyed doing?
Look, rugby league for me has always been a vehicle to kind of create some change and create positive aspects within society. One thing, as I mentioned, one thing that COVID certainly highlighted to everybody, not that we didn't know already, is that there's a massive degree of inequity within society, generally speaking, but also within sport. So opportunities for people with disabilities to engage in sport and benefit from all the impact that it creates are quite few and far between. And I think in such a tough, aggressive physical sport like rugby league, you wouldn't really be, you could be forgiven for thinking, tough for this, I don't know. But the way that we've kind of been able to manipulate and sort these and assess these variants and make them as approachable and applicable for people with a wide range of disabilities has probably been the thing that's been most rewarding for me. And the social impact that creates, whether that be an increase in employment, a change in lifestyle and healthiness, just generally speaking. Again, without labouring on COVID, most of the people that played our disability variants were identified as some of the most at risk and vulnerable to the effects of the virus. And one of the surefire ways to decrease those kind of risks are to be fit, healthy, good cardiovascular systems. But access to sport wasn't always available for many of our groups. So, seeing that and seeing the way that sport can positively impact someone's life, but also safeguard them from a lot of other challenges, which disabled people are so susceptible to, generally speaking. That's been one of the biggest things that I think we can do. And the stuff that we've reported on around social return on investment with regards to disabled participation and the way that the sport impacts their lives has been, hugely positive. I think our learning disability variant, for instance, returns £12 on every pound invested. So for every £1 that we spend on that offer to society, that the value is 12 times that value, because the people within that demographic benefit so much. Similarly, wheelchair, whilst it's slightly lower, you're looking at £4 to £5 worth of value, because people in these environments don't necessarily always get to play sport and get to benefit Well, being able to do that and reduce things like care costs and treatment of illness and treatment of, long-term health conditions and disease, those things are just hugely impactful. And the things that we do a lot of sparkly stuff, and it's great, and the jewels on top of the crown are fantastic. But actually, the Super League Grand Final that we show on Sky, or the Challenge Cup final on BBC, the biggest thing for me is the hope that brings eyes and visibility to the sport and says, well, actually, someone sat there who has been marginalised or doesn't feel like they can engage in a sport. So I go, well, actually, that person's like me. I could do this, and why aren't I doing this? So, that kind of stuff is fantastic. And it's why we put a lot of effort into those events and big things like that. Because ultimately, unless we inspire a new generation, new participants, whether that be older and never picked up a ball before, or younger and coming to the sport, they're the big wins for me, and the things that probably get me more excited necessarily than winning a grand final in the Super League, Wheelchair Super League and stuff.
What do you find challenging in your role, and is it not an inclusion thing, but maybe a take-up?
A take-up how?
Of numbers, obviously getting people involved.
Well, no, I mean, not wanting to blow my own trumpet, because it's a massive team effort and the RFL have done a lot of good work in this, but since the pandemic, I think we've grown at something around 150% increase in participation.
Is that the all inclusion?
Entirely in inclusion,
yeah.
So going back, I think we had something just prior to 2020, I think we topped our registration across all the disability variants at about 600. And this year, our figures were something in the region of about 1,400 participants registered. I think 700 of those come from wheelchair, which has grown from about 200 or 300 participants since 2020. Not including 2020, of course, because not many people registered when you couldn't play, but 2019 onwards. And our learning disability offer's grown to about 400 participants, and our PDRL's almost 300 now. So, immeasurable levels of social impact that we can create by all these new people coming to the sport. But we can do a lot more, and our targets are quite high, and we want to continue. Our stretch target's 3,000 participants by 2030, which we're on target for. We're 5 years into that 10-year plan, and we're about halfway. And obviously, that's probably with all the resources that we've been able to allocate towards it. Hopefully, we're coming into our last year of Sport England funding cycle this year. We'll be bidding for our potential increase for 27 onwards, and hopefully with that additional resource we can really attack some of the aspects that are potentially underserved across all of those different disabled communities.
So just this weekend there was a social inclusion launch. Martin Coyd were very pleased to tell everybody about the participation numbers in Wheelchair Rugby League now surpassed wheelchair basketball.
Right.
How many did you say they were playing wheelchair at the minute?
Yeah. I think we've got apologies, let me put that cup down. We've got about 700 registered participants across the game, but with a footprint within a formal sporting context, about 42 clubs participating in the pyramid. That's not including reserves, second teams within most clubs. So the footprint itself is quite broad. We've got really strong holding in the southeast, and also we've got obviously across the M62 traditional areas, but also in around the south of Midlands and going into Wales as well. So the footprint across the country is quite huge. And yeah, Martin does eulogise strongly about the wheelchair game. He loves it, and rightfully so. But like I said, we've got a significant amount of expansion still to come, hopefully. And I think the tagline from Martin is that he wants everybody to be able to access a Wheelchair Rugby League club within an hour to 90 minutes worth of travel either way. So that's significant. And having access points, like I said before, and giving people an opportunity to engage in one of the greatest team sports in the world is something that we'll continue to champion.
Would you say the increase in numbers from the wheelchair side of things is because maybe it's become more inclusive for maybe able-bodied players, as well as compared to like maybe the basketball game, which is more?
Yeah, it's definitely more readily accessible. and it's something that, you know, within my role, I look at a lot of different sports, and, you know, a precedent across most disability or impairment specific sports is that non-disabled participation often sits at the core.
Yeah.
And I personally don't have any kind of challenges with that. And I think being able to access it not only allows us to increase participation numbers, but actually the bigger kind of impact on that is the more human side of what we see. You know, a lot of the time, those non-disabled participants, they come from a family of an individual who's disabled, or some sort of link to an individual that may not, under any other circumstances, access the sport. So from my perspective, being able to be inclusive of non-disabled athletes whilst keeping disabled athletes at the core of the sport is something that is massive. And, you know, it's what we do across everything that we do in the game, because as I talked about social impact before, that disabled person accessing any of our sports has a broader impact on the family, the local community, and everything within. So yeah, non-disabled participation has definitely supported that, and being able to access the sport probably more easily without as many loopholes to jump through in the first instance is something that has been a strength. Now, that said, obviously the other side of that coin, the other side of the argument, I also understand where what we've also got to be careful of is that we don't have a non-disabled participant base that marginalises our disabled community. So, as you'll have seen in the last couple of years, we've started to be conscious of that in the wheelchair game and start to include categorisation. And whilst it's self-certified, you know, which leads to some challenges because, you know, in a competitive environment, all of a sudden an allegation can be made. But ultimately, what we're asking people to do is consider how your impairment impacts you. Is it a long-term health condition that absolutely affects your life? And who are we to judge that or make a statement on that? Or is it an impairment that actually affects your motor control of your ability to push a chair, manoeuvre a chair, catch, pass, and perform rugby league skills? So being able to put those categories in, whilst it's self-certified so that it's still readily accessible and easily done, it allows the sport to ring fence and safeguard places on the field for our disabled athletes and ensure that the sport is focused on those disabled athletes, whilst also saying, look, as a non-disabled player, not only can you come and play the game, but you can come and compete in this sport as well. And it's not like a facilitator role or somebody there to, you know, support someone through a game. You're in the game to win, and you're there to support your players by playing at your hardest. Yeah. And there's a lot of positives that can be said from that. So yeah, I'd suggest definitely. I think one of the other biggest factors that we can't take in, and one that I'm really excited about for something you mentioned, Andy, is that the impact of the World Cup in 2022, unmistakably our biggest year for accelerated growth. That final that happened in Manchester and England and France, it was spectacular. I was there on the night. It was a great experience, including all the histrionics that went on with the match officiation and things like that. Whilst at the time, I'm sure the players and the coaches were pulling their hair out, I was on the side of the pitch going, oh, this is good for views. This will get in the press. So yeah, being able to bring some visibility, good and bad publicity, you know, it was fantastic. But, you know, the World Cup did a great team. The legacy of that World Cup was spectacular as well. We were able to distribute hundreds of thousands of pounds specific for the wheelchair game, which equated to, you know, triple figure in regards to wheelchair resources. So you're looking at 100 plus wheelchairs distributed across the country. But being able to bring all those people to the sport from that occasion was spectacular. And look, we've got another one coming up this year. It's not on home soil, so we'll factor that in. But one thing we're really keen to do is look at the legacy and how this next World Cup we can also maximise.
Going back to the categories, would you think it's an area which may need to be expanded on? Or
expanded on how?
As in the different classifications of disability?
As in
where it stands currently?
Would you say more refined rather than expanded?
Yeah, I'd say more refined.
Like a refining. I don't necessarily think so at this time. We've done a similar exercise in our PDRL offer. So for those who aren't aware, Physical Disability Rugby League is an ambulant format of the sport. It bridges a gap between full contact and non-contact, depending on the way that person's impairment affects them. So, you know, if it's significantly above the expected anticipated dangers of making a tackle. If your impairment means that puts you at real significant risk, you can play touch within that, within the sport. So as long as you're ambulant and you can propel yourself across a rugby field, you can play PDRL. But we've done a similar exercise, and we've with International Rugby League developed a Paralympic standard classification system, and that, I do feel in that sport where it is bone-on-bone contact and people hitting each other within the rules most of the time, but hitting each other in a full contact format, it really did press that issue around actually understanding each person's impairment really in detail. And not only that, but how much loss, let's say that person, loss of ability to perform these skills, that person might have lost due to that impairment. And I do feel that has been the correct way to go. However, that's, it does lead to challenges. It leads to really emotionally charged conversations sometimes, because what we never do in any of our disability variants is judge how a person's impairment affects them. But what we have to take into account is how it affects their ability to play the sport. So, some people understandably perhaps misinterpret the way that they've been assessed. It's not me assessing them. These are trained classifiers, physiotherapists as a minimum level of qualification to become one. But we're never judging their impairment, how it affects them. We're just looking solely at the way that it affects their ability to play. Yeah. Now, but that has led to challenges in wheelchair, where we've got such a maturing offer and one that's growing so rapidly, and year on year we're getting, significant percentile growths, regardless of what that equates to at the end. 10, 12+% year on year. I'm reluctant to go down that path. I think that where we are now is that we've got a sport that people can play. The fact that we've got non-disabled players playing means that people can meaningfully play. Because I think if we were to suggest something like that and be really strict around impairment-specific groupings, you might leave a swathe of participants that reduces from the actual overall offer. Albeit, who knows in the future where it goes. But I certainly don't presently suggest that we'd go down that path.
Right, so going on to league structure for this season for wheelchair, it looks very different with 3 tiers. Can you tell us a little bit about where we are with that one at the minute, please? Yeah.
Look, year on year we review, and in wheelchair, because it's a maturing offer and one that's still coming to fruition. It's not that wheelchair's been about for 20 plus years, but we've never had open pyramid until these last 18 months or so. One that there's a conceivable pathway from a development team all the way through to the Super League. And, there's certain parameters, and it's a means tested approach to promotion. But everybody does have a chance now. This year, we're in a space where, we listen to our audience, we send questionnaires out, we want to understand the need of the audience that are playing the game. And we were able to establish that there was 16 teams that were all either desperate for or really promoting some sort of national competition. So we were able to have an 8-team Super League and 8-team Championship where there's relative parity in the 2 seasons. The rounds almost mirror each other with regards to length, albeit at the end of the year a slightly different format in that the Championship is a top 2 for the final and the Super League is a top 4 playoff. But below that, as exciting as any of that is, that we've got 2 regionalised divisions now. Last year in 25, the Championship was regionalised, but this year we've been able to, like I say, bring parity across the 2 elite divisions and then have a regionally based North and South regional divisions, which, prior to this year, it gives them the opportunity to play the right amount of games for them with predominantly local travel. It also allows them to test their kind of mettle at the end of the year against each other in a cross-conference playoffs format. Like I say, the main thing is in those clubs that are either new or developing a player base or a sustainable model around how they run the club, it's giving them that chance to really kind of get a footprint in the sport first. So yeah, that for me has been a really big win over the last 2 years, that we've now got a player base of 700 plus, with enough teams in the country to have 2 really competitive 18 divisions with a traditional home and away format. In previous years, you'll have noted that we had a slightly different format, especially in the Super League, where everyone played each other once and then there was a split. That was to kind of, it's not safeguard's the wrong word, but to support those new teams coming into the Super League. Because as a person who's played sport, the last thing you want to do if you go to a place and play a team that's so high flying and beats you 100-0 is then, or they come to you and then go, I've got to dredge to Halifax here and go and get a thumping. Edinburgh, who's brand new in the competition, it's a right schlep from Edinburgh to Halifax. So to do that with a potentially unmotivated player base, I mean, when I was playing my relatively short-lived amateur career, I knew when I could get picked for the first team, and usually it was when they were going up to Cumbria because none of the players wanted to go. So, I've got a chance that week. But other than that, it's a similar principle. We just wanted to make sure that the season was enjoyable for everybody. But this year, where those standards have continued to increase and improve, Sheffield, a great example of that this year, recruited really well in the off-season, but also promoted from within, and now have 4 players in the England squad. Sheffield are a great club that are doing really good things in the wheelchair game. Not just from a mass participation base, but actually now from a competition perspective as well. So the ability to put teams like that and give them more regular 14-game season against 7 really competitive teams is something that's really exciting. Similarly with below that, the Championship now, that's got representation from Hereford, albeit there's been a rebrand in the West Midlands Hurricanes now. And I believe they're going to start playing their games out of that kind of region towards the West Midlands Hurricanes play as well. But also, down the southeast through Gravesend. So, we've got, and North Wales Crusaders, of course, we've got a really widespread audience for those 2 divisions. So it's something that we're really championing. It's something that we're also proud about, where we can, as the governing body, support our Welsh compatriots to develop, our Scottish compatriots to develop, because ultimately the biggest thing for us is creating a much stronger international stage, because, as I previously mentioned, the World Cup is a massive driver, and international sport is the big driver in increasing participation. And going full circle, that brings more people to the sport, greater social impact, and a greater effect of our sport on the world.
Obviously, we've got, like you just said, we've got divisions of 8 at the minute. Do you have a perfect number in mind where you may be able to grow the divisions even bigger?
Potentially. I'm not saying this is the plan or it's not the plan. The other side of that coin is, do you reduce after that? Do you look to have a few years where it's 8 teams and then see, well, actually a couple of those teams haven't progressed? Do we reduce and have a 6-team competition where that audience is much denser and these highly athletic disabled participants and elite performers are condensed into 6 teams? There's a few different ways to kind of spin that one, but whether we grow, we'll always be informed by the audience. So if we ask the clubs and we're speaking to the clubs, could you play 2 more games? The cost and finances in wheelchair is significant. Facility space, hall hire, things like that. They're all challenges that you have to factor in when we're talking about a wheelchair game. So do clubs want more? Do they want less? Potentially. I think that probably a more reasonable way to approach is almost creating new offers within what exists. So if we have an 8-team Super League for the next 2 years, which it's guaranteed at because of each one's a 3-year cycle, after the next 2 years, we will probably look at opening applications and reassess and look where we might sit with regards to a structure. But within that time, I think that some of the biggest developments that we can do, and now Tom Coyde's in position as a pathways manager as well as the national coach, we've got a really good opportunity to kind of put offers that sit either above Super League in some sort of domestic representative model, or below that, or regionalised championship representative model. We've got opportunities really to kind of backfill the sport where we had a really, we've probably, since I come into position, had a relatively competitive 4 or 5 teams in the Super League. We're building that now. We're hopefully at the end of next year, we'll have 8 really competitive teams in the Super League. Look, I mentioned that legacy of the World Cup. If we can funnel new participants, elite participants and high performing participants into those Super League clubs, then that makes that offer even stronger, which is, you know, beneficial to the sport because that's where the focus is. But around that, what we've never had is a kind of representative structure above Super League that gives more people more of a intense environment and a competitive kind of gameplay that's selected on performance and based around performance, and having the ability and capacity to put new things in and around what exists currently is something that probably again makes me a bit more excited than necessarily almost kind of doing what we've always done. I think expanding is an option, like you say. If you go to a 10 team Super League or a 9 team now, obviously it just extends the dates from start time to finish. I think this year will be the longest season on record for Wheelchair, kicking off this weekend with the Challenge Cup and finishing in mid-September with the Grand Final. Typically we're probably more towards mid-April before we start really playing. But again, through the advice, through the considerations made by clubs, a more traditional format was appreciated and approved. Similarly then in the Championship we could do that. So yeah, we'll definitely continue to play with, listen to the audience and modify what exists to fit the needs of the audience base. But I think there's probably underrepresented sections that we could probably tap into with additional offers and new things that might come on the game.
Regarding how much bigger the league structure is this time around, are we expecting a bit more coverage around said leagues?
Coverage as
in media coverage,
Yeah. Look, we certainly do. I think so. Northern Rail have just come on as partners as well. I know Northern were at the season launch yesterday, and they've done a little bit of coverage there, and I think they're really excited to look at how, you know, they can kind of marry up their transport and the disabled community's needs and things like that. So being able to bring visibility to challenges within society on top of these sports, I think that's only going to benefit. I know that prior to that, obviously, what we ask for is that the clubs send us match reports. Those match reports go on BBC. Sometimes that doesn't happen, you know, and we can chase, and sometimes it creates challenges. But, you know, that's written into the kind of competition rules now, that those are kind of like small but not unmeaningful kind of punishments for the lack of doing that. You know, being able to kind of highlight try scorers, who's done that on a weekly basis is such a strong thing for us to do. And if we can get everybody to kind of engage in that, we'll definitely do that. And that's like not coming from the centre. From the centre, you know, we are bringing as best as we can a greater amount of visibility to our inclusion sports en masse this year. You know, like I said, the focus from the weekend's inclusion season launch was all around our top line offers and our England Wheelchair, England PD and so on. Being able to use them and build into that World Cup is going to be something that's going to be core and key to our media kind of representatives within the organisation this year. So yeah, I would expect an increase in visibility, but also potentially a greater increase on the more human side of it as well. Absolute coverage, results, all that's great. But actually, you know, looking at the human side of what we do, you know, we've got a big kind of strategy around our PDRL team with timely video releases, looking at the type of disabilities and impairments that come to the sport. And similarly with Wheelchair, you know, the strategy that's going on there, with it being a Betfred sponsored competition, that sits firmly with kind of Rugby League commercial now. They've been doing really good things over the last 2 or 3 years, and with regards to like interactions on social media, stuff that, you know, I'm 39 and I feel like a dinosaur when I'm talking about these things because it just doesn't register with me, you know. But, you know, the impressions around social media and the things that they've done, I think one of the biggest things for social traffic over the last couple of years was a wheelchair try that was scored by Seb Bachara at Wigan, where his wheelchair's above his head and he's touching down with his 2 hands. So that little clip in itself, you know, that brought such amount of visibility and eyes. And it's funny when we go places, you know, we start to see wheelchair basketball players kind of hanging around and having a look and coming over to talk to some of the players like, what is this? What are you doing? Because, you know, the sport in itself, well, it speaks for itself when it's being watched, but people are looking at it and starting to see that. And if we can increase that visibility and start to attract new players from different sports, high performing players, but also, like we said before, those audiences that haven't yet engaged in it, you know, it's a core thing. So bringing greater visibility is one of the, you know, it's one of the core principles we've got through 2026, so that, you know, we can go into this World Cup, be successful, and build on that success domestically as well by bringing that visibility and, you know, celebrating it. Like we said last time, I forget the audience share, but it was in the millions of that final across BBC Two. You know, the Royals were interested in it. You know, I think it's widely reported, so I won't say it again, but, you know, there's been a great deal of publicity off the back of that from, you know, the Princess Kate getting to kind of in and around the team and getting in the social and the inclusion offers have really kind of struck a chord with the core audience. So yeah, absolutely. The intention is to always increase visibility where there's space. And hopefully we'll see a lot more coverage across 2026.
So it's looking like the sport is on the build. It was included in the club-led strategic review back in the last year and into this year. So Section 72, there should be a dedicated expert group appointed to improve the financial sustainability of and player supply for the wheelchair sector. Is that something that's in the process happening now or forward?
It's in the process in that it's begun. We do have a wheelchair management group that sits somewhat separately to the organisation. There's a real strength in that. It's completely subjective. Completely objective. Freudian slip. But yeah, completely objective with regards to their outcomes. But their outcomes align with our kind of strategy around what we're doing. They've been tasked with essentially creating sustainable pathways for participants. But ultimately, I suppose the kind of brass tacks of that is money. So, you know, we absolutely want to make sustainable channels, creating new clubs, making it accessible. But ultimately, they're there to create a new offer, which brings visibility and hopefully finances into the sport. I'll say his name again, but Martin loves to eulogise about this. It's a grand idea from within, something that obviously we've consulted with them on. But the creation of a kind of new offer called the Wheelchair Premier League, which will sit in the winter time and hopefully be, you know, a best of the best format. People are invited from across the world to play in a format that is yet to be determined, but potentially reduced, whether that be in time, squad size, to be determined. But, you know, so if you can think about the way that the 100 has worked in cricket for bringing visibility, a short format and an exciting format, you know, that's the kind of model that is trying to be achieved in the wheelchair game as well.
That came up as in one of the paragraphs, considerations to be given to creating a new Wheelchair Rugby Premier League played in winter to produce a new broadcast and commercial product. So if that's what are we trying to sell that product to? Where are we going with that?
Well, initially, I think the guys who were on that group are got some really good connections within kind of like large companies with a lot of community social responsibility and things like that. So one of the big aspects is that there'll be some kind of suggested some heavy investment from kind of third parties into the game, which then we can do some sort of competition at the start, show a proof of concept, look how great this is, look at the potential, you know, audience and people that are coming to a live event, also on the broadcast, whoever or however it's broadcast. These are the kind of numbers. So what they'll be doing is looking to create as close to a perfect entity in that first one as you can, without any real kind of trial and testing necessarily. But then we build off the back of that and say, look at what we've got here. We've got this best kept secret in sport, regardless of disability or non-disabled sport. This could be yours. And I imagine the sales that you're looking at is then sponsors, TV broadcasters, and kind of the same sponsors that the men's running game is kind of chasing. You know, you'll be looking at blue chip companies, people that will put money into the sport and look to grow the game.
Has there never been a thought about doing that, but with Super League? Is there so much more you can do with Super League to put that in that kind of window?
Potentially, but I think that what we've got in Super League is that we've got a really young offer in the grand scheme of things. Like I said previously, whilst Wheelchair's been around a long time, what we've got now has only been in existence for a couple of years. You know, we're into year 2 of a 3-year licensing kind of strategy around that Super League. And what we've got to kind of do is have a traditional format. And I think you could absolutely attach some Super League names to it if you wanted to and use some of those existing brands. But I think what that probably does is it marginalises a broader audience. The ability to have new entities that are regionally kind of representative. So I'm not breaking any confidentiality. I think the intention is after year 1 to expand. So you'd have a Midlands team, a North East team, a Yorkshire team, a North West or Lancashire team, London, etc. What the first iteration lands, I don't know. Again, it's an independent body that are having these conversations, and when it's right, we'll probably have a chat with them about it. But the intention is that if you can attach regionalised branding to it, you know, if you're a Leeds Rhinos fan and you did that with Leeds Rhinos, that's great. But actually, everybody else might despise that team. So what they're trying to do is cut through that branding, cut through what's already exists and the attachments people have got to existing rugby league brands, and actually potentially even tap into different markets. You know, before my time, but a long time ago, you know, Fulham Rugby League Club was quite an entity in the game, and you know they've got a history with Challenge Cups and things like that. Well, there's no reason why Man United can't put a team in the Wheelchair Premier League. You know, Man United v Man City, that'd be quite a derby. We're absolutely speculating, but you know that's the kind of stuff that people are chasing here. That you've got big entities that we can tap into, and if you look in Europe, you know the way that basketball's delivered, it's very much a franchise model. So the Barcelona basketball team's fantastic, the Real Madrid one. You know, these kind of big sports franchises diversify the way they deliver. And I mean, while they're in my mouth, Leeds Rhinos are here as well. You know, they've got netball team now. They once had the rugby union outset. Obviously, they share a ground with the cricket as well. So that opportunity would be absolutely great, and existing rugby league communities could potentially attach themselves to some clubs. But starting fresh with new bodies that has regional significance is something that I think is a really new and interesting challenge that as its own thing. Your selection, you might not be from that place when you get selected. You might be a Yorkshireman who gets picked in the Lancashire team. It might not matter. Ultimately, the format will be determined, but the biggest thing is that we can cut through some of the kind of barriers that rugby league has generally, you know, the audience share that we get, but being able to kind of get into those areas with a disability sport is one that I think is really exciting. I think the guys on that team are really well placed to make a big impact in that.
So Martin mentioned about bringing the best players in the world to this competition. So saying that best in the world, is there an idea to maybe expand into having a French team involved? Or is it just bringing the French players over to play in?
I think certainly in the first iteration, you'd be looking at probably 2, maybe 3 core teams that the best players in the world are flown in to participate in.
Like the idea between Yorkshire and Lancashire. That'd be fun, won't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, it can get tasty. But yeah, being able to kind of bring that talent and condense it into 2, maybe 3 teams and go hell for leather at each other is the thing that you want, because you want the product on the field has to be spectacular. Now, I believe ours is, the Super League Grand Finals, the international game. They're brilliant matches to watch. You know, from a spectator's perspective, it's fantastic. But even further, if you strip away and only put the best few from there and the best, being able to ensure that what we deliver as a product on the field is so high in quality, that's brilliant. But what the guys that are on that group can also bring is the kind of wider stuff that surrounds it. You know, kind of make the production value in the build-up, bring the visibility if you're advertising, bring that kind of stuff is an area that they are really well placed to kind of tap into. Because like I say, I think we do the rugby league side of things really well. The stuff that surrounds it, the promotion, the visibility, the growth, you know, that's something that they're really well placed to do, the guys.
So if they are bringing them in worldwide and flying them in this and other, are we talking potentially we might get as first lot of professional players?
I think it depends on how you define professional. I think one of the things is absolutely, if players are taking time out to play in this offer, it's right that they are looked after appropriately, reimbursed on that. So if you wanted to class that as professional, I think so. I think more so when we talk about professionalism, professional sport and being paid to play the game, is why rugby league exists. Let's not forget, rugby league is a sport that's born out of working class people in 1895 being excluded from the sport because they couldn't go to work the next day. Well, they couldn't afford to miss a day of work, and people who have a lot said, we want to keep it amateur. So we said, fine, we'll make our own thing and we'll get paid doing it. So that kind of theory on inclusion and the way that the sport is born is kind of still steeped in the core of what we do in the wheelchair game. Now, professionalism might be that they are looked after and made sure that those individuals aren't out of pocket for coming and playing this offer. But I think within the game now, we're striving for professional standards in many aspects across the board, especially in our Super League and Championship. Whilst we're not asking clubs to pay players, it's an area that actually the standards, what we're asking for, like the reporting at the end of each game, like naming your squad on a Friday so that we can put the squad lists out, like making sure the fixtures are all set up and confirmed prior to season commencing so that we can promote and put on the different websites and media channels with confidence. We know where that game is, when it's happening, and that it's definitely going to happen. Because only a few years ago, that wasn't a guarantee, in the wheelchair game. It's come on so much, so absolutely in participation numbers. But the way that the games are administered, played, and presented on any given weekend, those standards are going towards professionalism. Now, absolutely, look, similarly, in the same breath that we're talking about the Wheelchair Premier League, creating this new offer that brings more visibility and money into the game, it's the same principle what we're applying to the Super League. We're setting really strict parameters around that competition, that you must have X, Y, and Z done. And a lot of people, when they achieved that Super League status, that was why they got it, because they gave us confidence that you can achieve these things. Because ultimately, what we're trying to make from the Super League is a product of value. And if you make a product of high value, that's when you can start speaking to people about potentially, bringing more money into the game through broadcast or through sponsorship. But unless you've got a competition that all the games are played when they say, where they say, and how they say, all those things that haven't necessarily been a guarantee over the last few years, that's what we're kind of aiming towards now. So there's stricter governance, there's a heightened expectation to almost professional standards across those Super League clubs, and some of that's filtered down to the Championship to hopefully prepare readiness for those teams to progress if they want to. But yeah, so professionalism, I think, is at the core. That might not mean that in the next 5 years I'm hoping to be drawing up contracts for players, but I think that what it does do, hopefully, is make sure that people can enter the sport in a professional way, approach the sport in an elite format. And who knows, one of the symptoms of those things might be that there is money there eventually. But it's not my personal kind of North Star. It's not the payment. My thing that we're aiming for are more people participating to create that social impact and driving that through the promotion of an elite offer. So absolutely professionalism. That definition might be a little bit different how we define it, but yeah.
Another point in the review is the competition structure should not be restricted to current clubs that run men's professional teams. And we've seen now with Edinburgh, they're standalone, London are a standalone, Hereford have become Midlands and obviously running now with a professional team. But what are you expecting there? Do you think some amateur teams might take it up, or are you expecting just new clubs starting as a charity? And definitely amateur clubs. Like you say, some of the unique entities in the wheelchair game are solely wheelchair clubs. They don't have any other aspects to them. That's something that is, it's brilliant. We celebrate those things. There's a lot of benefits to being attached to a professional club foundation.
not just from the way that we can distribute some funds to those clubs as well and support them, but also, you know, there's an existing fan base, and if a fan has a curiosity to come and see a wheelchair game, and more often than not, they kind of fall in love with it and it happens for life. But I think with that point, what I'd be more kind of keen to say, or more, I think what they're leaning towards with that, because don't forget, this is a club-led review.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that we contributed to directly, but we do take on those review points. And a lot of them are really good, but most of them are what we're trying to do anyway, you know, and if they can add value to it through these groups, then that's great. But yeah, I think probably what they're more looking at is existing big entities. So I've mentioned like a football club kind of stance there, and if you can engage, like, I'll do a Martinism here, but I'll say a soccer, because he likes his soccer to define, because this is football as well. But, you know, the kind of big soccer clubs, if any of those have social impacting programs and want to engage in a disability sport that reflects the game that it's playing, then obviously, you know, Wheelchair Rugby League's a great one for that. But even more so, dare I say, and it could be controversial to some, but there's no reason why we can't engage with rugby union clubs. You know, the wheelchair rugby is a great offer, and it's a Paralympic sport. But there's no reason why we can't incorporate a similar player base into our audiences. So, you know, it wouldn't be crazy, I don't think, to say a Gloucester Rugby League, wheelchair rugby league team enters, you know, or any name. You know, there's no suggestion that Gloucester have even had a conversation. But, you know, yeah, it's more around the fact that in principle we're not restricting it solely to rugby league entities. Let's look further afield. Let's incorporate other people with social value and different communities that we might not have tapped into previously, even if that means going to rugby union and the dark side.
The dark side.
Oh, don't. I'm scared already.
Is it, well, you just touched on a couple more points there. So work should be undertaken with other sports and governing body requests to produce a more rounded product. That's your Manchester United and such, whatever else want to get involved. And point 77 was consideration should be given to improving dialogue with the RFU around the opportunity for a unified wheelchair game. So a unified game, I think that's what's a lot of people have picked up on straight away. A question on that one.
Yeah.
Do you, when you say, obviously, it's, like you said, it's not you, but when a unified wheelchair game has been spoken about, is that not an hybrid and more of an addition to what's already there then?
Possibly. I think for the detail, you would have to ask the individuals that wrote that review. But I think when we're reading that, and this isn't one that we, you know, the wheelchair aspect of this strategic review rightfully has its place in this. But at the same time, you know, when we've ever heard any of the conversations around it, what the suggestions are within that are kind of like, look, what we're doing in the game right now is pretty good, and what's coming out of that and the outcomes are really good, and they're accelerated beyond probably what we'd have previously anticipated. I suppose what they're talking about there with all this stuff, but I'll come on to the last point in a second, is that they're adding value through different aspects of the sport where we can govern the game. They can say, well, actually, let's put the bells and whistles on all this stuff and let's do it a bit differently. That one there, obviously, I think the wording's really key on it. It's exploring things. I don't think there's been any approach. I don't think there's been a conversation necessarily with the RFU on any of that stuff. But it certainly is looking at how you can incorporate this international Paralympic global sport of wheelchair rugby, or I don't think they reference it as murder ball anymore, but just for people at home who might not understand, you know, but that ultimately has a completely different format than what rugby union is. You know, it's a completely different sport. It's probably more akin to kind of, I don't want to be patronising, but a bit more like netball, but like full contact netball. Although I know netball players and they tell me it's one of the most physical non-contact games you've ever played.
Elbow.
So yeah, exactly. But so the point is, I think, you know, if you can align those two, and, you know, again, where rugby league and rugby union typically has a stark contrast and a big divide, the fact that we've got a socially impacting programme and a project like Wheelchair Rugby League, I think it probably reduces some of those barriers that we've had around that integration and conversation around working together. So yeah, I'd be certainly interested to know how we could facilitate that, and I'd be really interested to know the opportunities that may present themselves. But I've held conversations with people with rugby union backgrounds who love what the rugby league disability sports have to offer, A lot of our PDRL players, for instance, especially those in the Midlands and from the South, come with rugby union backgrounds, who happen to have a disability and come to the sport because there isn't something necessarily that fits their kind of needs in rugby union yet, or maybe ever will be. But yeah, that opportunity would be something that I'd be, look, we're not proud in with the people I work from, and if there's opportunity to create a better product, we don't really mind too much who we speak to, if it's rugby union or not. I don't think there's a great divide there in the disability variants, certainly. But I would be interested, definitely. I'd be interested to know who, how and when we could facilitate some of that. And I'd love to hear Wig and see what the steering group think about it. But yeah, really good.
When we're speaking about the Premier League, obviously mentioning about different teams coming from different areas, like I was just having to think about teams such as like maybe teams getting together like GB Police, like a British Army, Royal Navy and things like that. It's like the running game, with certain teams being involved in the Challenge Cup, such as the British Army.
Yeah, they have been in the past,
is that something that could possibly go down that route with the Challenge Cups? Or?
Oh, well, look, we're open to. So for the Challenge Cup, for instance, Challenge Cup this year, similarly with the league structure, has got a brand new format. It's the first time we've had a 16-team competition where the Championship and Super League are all in. It was a proper draw done in front of an audience. It's a great little thing we've got going there. And that competition is, the rugby league ability in that competition is going to be really high. For a team that kind of intermittently participates, what we've also, or a developing team and regionally based teams, we've got our Challenge Trophy. Now, our Challenge Trophy is like the supplementary offer, but it's a way that all those teams can meaningfully participate and enter the sport and say, well, let's go and give it our all. That's definitely open to those kind of widespread teams, and they exist already. For the Wheelchair Premier League, I think what they're looking at more is because that regionalisation of it, and the look at the kind of audiences geographically based is key to, kind of get them behind a team, give them an identity through the geography, and then hopefully bring more people to the sport from that. If you start being quite bespoke and specific with armed forces offers or police, it definitely works, and we see it in the running game. I forget the name of the cup, but I'm sure it's part of the Community Alliance programme. But those guys come and have, the Navy player, the police player, students, they kind of incorporate it, and it definitely works. But I think what we'd probably do, and again, this is not patronising in any way, I think what they're looking for is to absolutely skim the top 1% of participants and put them into these teams that we just know that the standard's going to be so high, it's going to be exciting, the games are going to be tight. What we wouldn't want to do is ring fence the selection base to something relatively small like police or like any one body where you have to have an old affiliation to play for it.
With the bodies like that as well, if there wasn't, say, involved with the Challenge Trophy or anything like that, I think the difficulty is with players already playing for said local clubs. I suppose that's the difficulty with the numbers.
Right, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah. No, it is a challenge, but look, there's opportunity there, and in the same way, it's the same principle that we're not just looking at traditional rugby league audiences to create new Wheelchair Rugby League. So if any of those kind of bodies wanted to enter a team, Colostomy UK are one that are really interested new to Wheelchair Rugby League, but an interested in new organisation in the sport. And they're kind of looking for what works best, because they've got social outcomes, they've got competitive outcomes, and they want, different things from all that kind of stuff. Well, wheelchairs are a pretty decent home for them because they've got, every one of their participants has a long-term health condition, obviously through a stoma or colostomy. So, it works and fits quite nicely for them. Or similarly then, if we could incorporate any long-standing body, like the ones you've mentioned, if they had the opportunity to engage more frequently, then we'd definitely entertain that. Not just entertain it, we'd probably champion it and really promote it. It'd sound like it'd be a great opportunity.
I've got one more question. I'm really excited. One day it's got to happen. When is Wheelchair Rugby League from the UK going to Las Vegas? Have the NRL been in touch yet?
The NRL, if you listen to the to the gossip pages, I believe the NRL are constantly in touch, but not with me. So yeah, I don't know. I think it would be high on the agenda. I do know that the NRL have taken Wheelchair Rugby League a lot more seriously now, and they've got their own little kind of pillar within the NRL that has a wheelchair specific kind of governance structure. They're really growing, and as Nathan said on your last podcast, the standard over there from their recent tour has dramatically increased. They wwere competitive at the last World Cup, but in that tour recently, they were,
They were great.
They were in touching distance of beating England, which, I don't think anyone would have expected before the tour started. So, yeah, look, it's a possibility with a wheelchair game is there. I know that there's been conversations previously about Wales going over and doing some stuff around a similar time. If we can facilitate it, we'll make it happen, definitely. And look, if anyone needs someone to sweep the changing rooms, I'll go with them and make sure it's all right. But my wife might be unhappy. I'll lose all our savings on the roulette, but we'll see.
Put it all on zero.
Yeah, something like that. Something really sensible. I think she'd champion that.
Chris, it's been great having you on podcast, and I think we've got some really good information out there for everybody for the beginning of the wheelchair season this season.
Got an exciting weekend coming ahead with the Challenge Cup.
And then we're only a couple of weeks away from league.
Is there any game you're looking forward to?
Are you attending one?
I won't be attending, but I'm looking forward to the most. I believe Casford and Bradford are playing.
That is
that one because everyone's mentioned that.
That's
one.
the match of the round, is that one? Isn't it?
I'm interested on that one. It's that looks like a really interesting tie. So yeah, the Bradford Casford game's one that I'll be keeping a keen eye on that result. But all the results all the fixtures at this round, they're interesting for me because a lot of the Championship clubs have Super League aspirations, and a lot of the Super League clubs, have progressed and accelerated beyond probably what we'd anticipate. And being able to see that kind of, at least on-field gap, whether it's that big or that big, I'm really interested to see the entire 8 rounds. But from the perspective of, the outcome, I'm certainly interested in that Bradford Cass.
I think everybody is. Everybody looking out for that one. Thanks a lot then, Chris.
No worries.
Thanks again for joining us, everybody. It's been awesome to come back in the studio. it's like I'm back home now, as it's been too long. So please, if you are watching, do subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really does help. And do subscribe to all the social media channels. We're everywhere now.
So behind the scenes as well, we've been trying to organise quite a lot of things. So you've got a lot of things to look forward to this upcoming season. And hopefully we can bring more to you.
There will be more content, more episodes, more Wheelchair Rugby League. So see you next time.
Thank you.